This is Mike Franklin, a property tax guy, and it is September 19th, 2022, and today we're going to review a Syracuse.com article written by Tim Knauss. Facing irate taxpayers, two central New York towns drop efforts to keep property assessments current. John and Deborah Snyder stand in front of their home in town of Lysander Monday, April 5th, 2022. The Snyders and other Lysander residents were shocked by increases in their property assessment this year. To avoid a repeat of that, the town officials will not raise assessments in 2023. And so I'm going to review this article. And coincidentally, the assessor for the town of Lysander and the town of Van Buren, the subject of this story, is Theresa Golden, and what they're saying is that the town is not going to try to keep the assessments at 100% equalization rate because so many people were irate this year. They did across the board 14.24% increase, and I'm going to discuss the rationale of that. And I'm going to suggest to you there's two major issues to this. One is obviously politics. When towns go to 100% or they do a revaluation, it causes, it can cause people to be removed from office, and so they like to avoid that. And the other issue is the job that Theresa Golden is doing, which I'm going to suggest is not very good. She's been the assessor for the town of Lysander for 14 years and for Van Buren for 22 years. But anyway, it's coincidence that those are the two towns that don't want to do this. So let's see what they have to say in this article. After a big spike in property tax assessments caused by an uproar this year, elected officials in two Onondaga County towns have decided not to put their residents through that again next year. I think it's more like put themselves through it again this year. They're not going to reassess, annually. The town leaders said they want to spare property owners another huge jump in assessments next spring. And, well, I would suggest that's because, they didn't handle the situation properly, and it creates problems for them. And, yeah, it annoys the taxpayers, but the problem isn't 100% equalization. I can assure you of that. At some point, we had to give our residents a break, said Wendy Vanderwater, the Van Buren Town Council, who introduced the resolution. I don't know Wendy Vanderwater, but it's giving themselves a break. It's got nothing to do with giving the taxpayers a break. It's taking political pressure off of themselves. The decisions by both towns, which reversed long-standing assessment policy, came amid growing rancor over inflation-driven assessment hikes. Rightly or wrongly, many residents interpret raising assessments to be de facto tax increases. And that is true. Many taxpayers confuse the difference between high taxes and high assessments. The assessment is just a method to establish your percentage of the total budget. So the problem isn't the assessment so much. The purpose of the assessment is to get to fair market value to determine your fair percentage. That's how they decide it. But the real problem is building professional football stadiums for your high school, and and the school spending money frivolously. I mean, I'm not certain what the school district, Baldwinsville school district rate is, but they're usually around $25,000 per student, and so that's $100,000 per 4 years. Just seems like a lot of money. Can you imagine if people had to pay their own kids' funds? I know my parents had 7 kids, so 7 kids at a time would be $175,000 a year. Where does that money come from? It just doesn't grow on trees. But so the issue is you have town and county budget, you have school budget. So if you're concerned about your high school taxes, you need to vote on the school budget. That's your recourse there. And then, of course, as far as your town and county budget, you can vote those people out of office. For example, in Lysander, the supervisor is Robert Wicks, and I contacted him about our assessment concerns, and he was quite dismissive. So my suggestion, vote against Robert Wicks. Let's see. So they talk about Theresa Golden. Theresa Golden, the assessor for both Lysander and Van Buren, what a coincidence, said she faced unprecedented outrage from property owners this spring, especially in Lysander. She supported the town board's decisions to take a break, even though she has spent her career working to keep assessments at 100% market prices. Both towns had 14% increases, except for maybe Theresa's house. You might want to check that one out. Let's see. Without a change of course, Lysander residents would have faced increases of 10 to 15% next year, essentially doubling the hikes they got this year, Golden said. I hear loud and clear that the public has had enough of this, she said. Lysander and Van Buren are the latest towns to abandon the most experts consider a best practice, revising assessments each year to match what similar properties sell for. The town's recent moves reflect a growing perception that, especially during a housing boom, New York's disjointed property tax system provides no incentive for towns to do the right thing. Well, from my perspective, the only problem I've seen with the state thing is the great story Syracuse.com did on the difference between the school districts across the river. I'd never noticed that before, and that's a pretty concerning problem, and that would be a state problem. And so I can see that as a problem. But the overall problem that I see in Van Buren and Lysander is Theresa Golden. My experience is, quite frankly, and I don't say this lightly, but my experience with her is she's a pathological liar. And what she does is she's under pressure to get to 100%. So what she does is any opportunity she can get to raise somebody that has any kind of anything that she could even remotely justify, she just clicks her mouse and adds figures to it. In other words, she's not using proper valuation methods to do it, and I find it to be despicable. I have foiled her records, and she refused to give me her cost report, which she says the town doesn't pay for, but that was never stated in the FOIL response. I didn't hear about that until a SCAR hearing. I'd asked her for a comparable sales report. She says she doesn't have it, which is an absolute lie. And she delayed, here's what Theresa needs to do. Here's a message directly to Theresa. Theresa, we don't expect you to be an absolute expert on valuation. What we would like you to be is an expert in customer service. So when a taxpayer brings a concern to your attention, you need to look into it in good faith, thoroughly. And then your job is to have an opinion of value. If you agree with them, make an adjustment. If not, politely point them to their appeal options. It's not rocket science. It's as simple as that. But you need to look into it in good faith. And you need to stop gerrymandering, these assessments, just winging it. That's what she does. She wings her assessments. Like I said, she's under pressure from the state to bring it to 100%. So any opportunity she can come up with to make one, and it's called selective assessment, violation, welcome stranger, and it's against the law. And so I haven't had a huge sampling of her work, but I got a pretty good feel for how she rolls. And she is pathological with a capital P. And what she'll do is she will wing it, and then she will reverse engineer to try to come up with something to justify what it is that she did. It's really And it's no wonder that she's manic about what's going on, because, they're inundating her because she's not doing her job. And so, she has probably hundreds of people breathing down her neck, and rightfully so. But the thing is, if she simply let the computer generate the numbers and, do her best to, see where there might be, issues, update the inventory, for example. But here's the problem with her inventory. She just wings that too. Her inventories are so inaccurate. It's mind-boggling. And it basically renders her inventory useless. Of course, it is useless because I foiled her figures. What does she charge for a half a bathroom? What does she charge for a second kitchen? What does she charge for a fireplace? She refused to respond because she knows if she provided those figures, we'd be able to debunk her figures that she spent, like 30 seconds doing. So if you think that there's any analysis involved in your assessment, it's about 30 seconds to 2 minutes worth is what she might have spent on your property, which is kind of understandable when you have thousands of properties to deal with. But don't suggest that you are doing it properly when you're not. What you should try to be is be a little more humble and acknowledge that it's an enormous task to value all of these properties, and you have to rely on mass assessment techniques. But the thing is, her attitude is she's always right and she's never wrong. And the thing is, I think the opposite is the case with Theresa Golden. Let's see what other nonsense she has to say. Yeah, it makes it hard to compare if they're not at 100%. Well, that's true. The equalization rate it confuses people. There's no doubt about that. Some of these towns it's just outrageously confusing for people. Okay, only Manlius, Salina, Tully, DeWitt are at 100%. Well, even if they're at 100%, it doesn't mean there aren't problems. The assessor in Manlius, Pat Duffy, he behaves very much like Theresa Golden. He's always right, he's never wrong, and he doesn't like responding to FOIL requests in a timely manner or in a complete manner. Routinely, I've been dealing with him for 4 years. He's never provided a FOIL request in a timely and complete manner. Never. And FOIL is New York State law. He doesn't seem to care about New York State law. Again, Golden has been the assessor for 22 years and 15 years as Lysander. During that time, she has consistently maintained assessments at 100% of market value. Good for her. But, just because it's at 100% doesn't mean that it's right. What it means is 50% are high and 50% are low. So 50% are getting a good deal and 50% are getting screwed. But you're at 100%. So she feels as though that's her driving force to make her feel or justify, to the town board that she's doing her job. But I can assure you she is not doing her job. If she did what I suggested she do, then she'd be doing her job. And like I said, what I asked her to do is when taxpayers call, look into it in good faith. It's okay to let the mass assessment techniques, it's okay to do that because it's the only practical way to do this job. But when there's concerns, you respond to them. You're not, you don't delay them. You're not rude. You're not dismissive. Yeah, she says she's going to, educate people. It's hard to educate people when they're yelling at you. Well, I think part of it's because Theresa Golden needs an education as to how to do this job. And so I think the taxpayers are correct in yelling at her. Now, I agree that a very large number of people don't know the difference between high taxes and high assessment. So, that's understandable. But she's been doing this for 22 years. She should be able to figure out how to explain that to people. Taxpayer property owners have grown increasingly irate year after year increases, in part because they see assessments going unchanged in neighboring towns. Again, that would be an issue with the state, and we're not going to blame that one on Theresa Golden, although there's plenty to blame on Theresa Golden. That state issue is, let's see if we can pick on the state a little bit. Like I said, I'd never seen that before, and obviously that's a problem. And so I guess the solution is to get everybody to 100%. That would be the proper solution. That would make that go away. And so after the Lysander Town Board sees that article in the newspaper about the problem across the river, what do? They don't do anything. But let's talk about the town of Clay. Damian Ulatowski is the supervisor there. I've known him from years past. He's quite a disingenuous fellow himself. Not to mention he owes me money, but be that as it may. Ulatowski, he's staying away from doing, for the same reason, for political reasons, so people don't get pissed and vote him out. So he's not interested in doing the right thing. He's interested in doing what's politically prudent, and that's what's going on in Lysander and Van Buren, because people were angry. But if you think they're angry this year, wait till next year. Okay. At this point, other than feeling that you're doing the right thing, there's no incentive to do this, Golden says. So that's what I mean by pathological, okay? Other than feeling you're doing the right thing. She feels as though she's doing the right thing, which is hilarious to me. But that is how she behaves. She, in her mind, she's convinced herself she's doing a great job. But when she is amongst the worst I've ever seen in 10 years of doing this in 17 counties. She's unbelievable. Pat Duffy in Manlius is really bad. He's disingenuous, but at least he knows what he's doing. Okay. Let's see. The Lysander's decision was driven in part by the conviction that the system unfairly penalizes towns at 100%, said Robert Wicks, the town supervisor. Again, it's about politics. When I had concerns for Mr. Wicks, he's supporting his assessor, which I think is noble of him to defend his employees. But the thing is, you defend your employees when your employees are doing the proper thing. When they're not doing the proper thing, you can't just mollycoddle them. You need to have a chat with them. But anyway, he doesn't want to go to 100% because he could get voted out. That's what that's all about. Let's see. In some cases, county and town school taxes can end up higher for properties that are assessed annually compared to with similar properties in towns that don't raise assessments. Again, that's a state equalization issue. We're not going to blame that on the town of Lysander. The property owners in Salina paid $17,000 to $2,000 more than property owners in Clay. Again, that's Damian Ulatowski playing politics, and basically. People in Salina are getting screwed over, but again, that's the state's fault, and Ulatowski is just playing the game. He's playing the game within the state's rules, so I guess the state has to do something about that. And since we're talking about the state doing something about that, we have what the BAR system and the SCAR system. Board of Assessment Review is a town program. The Small Claims Assessment Review is a state program, and a state program is run by the New York State Unified Court System. And the Unified Court System, really could care less about the SCAR program. They just don't care. They're completely insensitive to taxpayers' concerns. The SCAR program it's actually a pretty decent program, but it hasn't been updated, is my understanding, since 1986. And it needs to have some things fixed. For example, people with a vacant parcel of land. I had one where they raised the guy's assessment from $40,000 to $400,000 overnight. That's his taxes went from about $1,600 to $16,000 overnight, and so there's no appeal process at SCAR because it doesn't qualify for SCAR. Well, absolutely, that should qualify for SCAR. It's a small claims issue. It should not have to go to state Supreme Court, but of course it did have to go to state Supreme Court, and of course we prevailed very significantly in that case, got it guaranteed for 4 years, and it costs the town of Manlius taxpayers money for legal fees. I'm still trying to find out how much, but they refuse to respond to my FOIL request thus far. But yeah, I'd like to quantify, how much that nonsense costs the taxpayers. It's they don't mind because it's not their money; it's the taxpayers' money, so they don't care. The assessor doesn't care. That's Pat Duffy, by the way. Let's see. Town of Salina recently passed a resolution asking state legislators to fix the program. That's a good idea. They leave it up to this parallel person. I'm not familiar with that person, but that sounds like a good idea. Only one town councilor in Lysander, Kevin Rode, voted against changing the assessment policy. Rode argued in Facebook posts that freezing assessments amounted to parlor tricks that did not address the underlying problem. And that is true. So I applaud Kevin Rode for that comment. But he says what needs to be done is to have village, town, and county elected officials urge the state to come up with a fair assessment process. Well, and so that process needs to be tweaked. So I agree with him there. But the thing is, the problem isn't only with the state. In Lysander, the problem is with Theresa Golden, the assessor. She's just not doing the job, and she is dismissive. She's ridiculous, and so to Mr. Rode, I appreciate that the parlor tricks comment. It's absolutely true. I agree that the state needs to they need to tweak their program, but the grass, which impacts the issue where people on one side of the river are paying more than the other. That's a state problem. But the mass majority of this problem is with Theresa Golden and her enablers. Robert Wicks and the town attorney. I forget his name, but anyway, so the reality is Robert Wicks is the problem if he can't get his assessor under control and have her do the job properly. And again, it wouldn't be that difficult for him to get his assessor to do the job. Let me repeat what she needs to do. Let the computer, the state program, do the valuations. She needs to keep her inventory up to date, and she needs to actually do the job, okay? Because that's not a lot of fun to do that job, but she's getting paid to do it. If you get paid to do a job and you don't do it, it's called fraud. She needs to do the job, and then if a taxpayer calls an issue to her attention, she needs to look into it in good faith and have an opinion of value. Either she agrees and makes an adjustment, or she doesn't, and she politely points them to their appeal options. It isn't that complicated. That's what we need her to do. She's been doing it for 22 years. You would think by now she'd get this figured out, but I think she's lazy on the assessment, and then she backpedals. When she gets caught having winged her valuations, she makes these adjustments to keep it 100%, and she just with the click of her mouse, she just goes through. She sees an article in a newspaper or she sees a listing, and she just clicks her mouse without doing a proper analysis. And then when people catch her on it, she gets defensive and she just starts making up pathological nonsense. That's what she does. Okay, what else we have? A hard pill to swallow. Residents of Lysander Van Buren got notices that assessments would increase by 14%. And again, what people need to understand is if the whole market went up 14%, and they do a townwide valuation, if the budget doesn't change, your assessment doesn't change. But the question is your assessment at fair market value? Because that's what her job is. If they don't keep it at fair market value, so let's say Lysander goes to 90% equalization. Well, let's just say your assessment is at $90,000, and that means fair market value is $100,000. So the question is your property worth $100,000? Can you sell your property for $100,000 as of the valuation date, which is usually the 1st of July the year before? Can you sell it for that amount? That's what this is about. It's about fair market value. What else we have? This article talks about two different things. The issue with the state, between two towns. So it's a big problem when there's a school district that spreads across two townships, and they do it this way. And so Salina and Lysander, or in Clay rather, Salina and Clay, that's a big problem, and that's a state problem. But as far as getting to fair market value and this equalization issue, that's Theresa Golden in this case. In Manlius, it would be Pat Duffy. But they just need to. This is a customer service issue. They need to treat taxpayers with respect and dignity, even if the taxpayer isn't aware of the difference between high assessment and high taxes. Yeah, she does need to explain that to him. But well, that's her job. So if she's got a problem with that, and then we have SCAR issues, SCAR hearings, and she doesn't want them to be recorded. And so my suggestion to the town of Lysander is that the assessor is a public job. And if your assessor has a problem being video recorded in hearings, perhaps you need another assessor, and you need to put on the job description that some public appearances and recorded hearings may be necessary. And if that's a problem, you need not apply. And so that's where we're at with Theresa Golden. What else we have here? She says it's hard to educate when they're screaming at you, she says. They're screaming at you, Theresa, because you haven't done your job properly. That's why they're screaming at you. And I'll agree, some of them do need to be educated on high assessment versus high taxes, but that's really not the extent of the problem, Theresa. The problem is because you're not doing your job properly, and I've explained to you how the appropriate way to do it is. And I'm going to just quantify why it is that I think that I'm qualified to make that determination. Most town boards or supervisors have had very limited experience with assessors and how they're supposed to behave, whereas I have had dealings with them in 17 counties with dozens of assessors, and I've seen how they've operated, anywhere from very good assessors to really bad assessors like Theresa Golden, and everything in between. So I have a pretty good idea of how they should be behaving, and in Lysander and Van Buren, it's not good. Let's see. John Deere. John Deere says he would rather have our professional staff and professional assessor doing the work to make sure that it is equitable as possible. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I had a discussion with John Deere, and he listened. He appeared to listen attentively, and he took notes. But we'll see what happens, next year. I felt very comfortable in that he was willing to listen. Now we have to see if that turns into any changes as to how things happen in the town of Manlius. A variety of issues in the town of Manlius with the assessor. I think he's been doing a job for too long. He thinks he can get away with whatever he wants. Let's see. A decade ago, nearly half of all cities and towns, 48%, assessed properties at full market value. According to state tax department data, this year the number fell to 20%, just 1 in 5. That's not good. That's not good. But that's a statewide issue. That's got nothing to do with the problems in the town of Lysander and Van Buren. Theresa Golden is the problem in the town of Lysander, and she's being enabled by Robert Wicks, the town supervisor. This is Mike Franklin, the property tax guy.